Last summer, I rented an Airbnb in Northern California. While browsing the app, I found numerous attractive options, but a specific location caught my eye. A street lined with several Airbnb rentals. I selected my favorite and booked it. A month later, I flew in, picked up my rental car, and drove an hour to the Airbnb. It was late, around 10 or 11 p.m., and all I wanted was to bring my stuff inside and crash on the bed. As I opened my car door, a middle-aged woman from the neighboring house started waving at me. She stood in her driveway, smiling and greeting me. I returned her wave, hoping to avoid a conversation, and turned my back to her as I unloaded my suitcase and duffel bag. I walked up the driveway to the door, catching glimpses of her still watching me from the corner of my eye. Once inside, I locked the door behind me, shook my head in confusion, and carried my bags to the bedroom. The house was nice, and everything seemed to be in order, but I didn't take the time to check it thoroughly. I just wanted to shower and sleep. I turned on the shower, and while washing off, I heard the doorbell ring. I ignored it, assuming whoever it was would leave. The doorbell only rang once, so I didn't check after drying off, and went straight to bed. I slept soundly for nearly 10 hours and woke up feeling well rested the next morning. That evening, after spending the day exploring the city and dining at a popular restaurant, I returned to the house around 7. The same woman from the previous night was now standing by my front door. When she saw me, she quickly ran back to her house and went inside. This behavior unsettled me. Over the next hour, I kept an eye on all the windows, frequently checking to see if she would come back. While sitting in the kitchen on my laptop, I heard a thud against the back door. It sounded like a rock being thrown. I glanced out the window but saw nothing at first. Upon closer inspection, I noticed a small figure in the dark field behind the house, picking something up and throwing it at the window I was looking out of. I backed away, realizing it was probably that woman. I opened the back door and called out, telling her to go away. The figure remained still in the dark, ignoring my threats to call the police. A creepy feeling washed over me as I slid the door shut. Uncertain about involving the police, I decided to wait and see if she did anything else. After a while, it seemed she had given up, and I eventually went to bed, not thinking about her anymore. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. It was quick and quiet, and I wasn't fully awake yet, but I knew I heard something. Moments later, faint footsteps echoed down the hallway outside my room. My eyes widened as I jumped out of bed and swung the door open. Standing just a few feet away from me was the woman, barefoot in my hallway. She quickly retreated and left the house. I followed her out the front door, watching as she disappeared into her house. I locked the front door and called the police. When the police arrived and knocked on her door, there was no answer. We soon discovered that her house was also an Airbnb, owned by the same person who rented me my place. No one had booked her house, so she must have somehow known the code and had been staying there for several days. We couldn't find any reason for her actions, nor any signs of her identity or whereabouts. Unnerved and unwilling to stay another night, I left and flew back home. The mystery of her intentions remains unsolved, but I couldn't risk staying to find out. In the spring of 1995, just after my 18th birthday, my uncle offered me and my friends a week-long stay at his summer home by the lake. It was a family-only rental deal, and he had promised me this trip when I was old enough. My uncle, who was incredibly wealthy from his lounge businesses in Vegas and La, was a bit of an enigma. We only saw him a few times a year, but those times were always memorable. My family lived in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, while the lake house was in Antioch, Illinois, a mere 20-minute drive across the border. Despite the short distance, my parents were initially hesitant to let me go. At the time, I thought it was because they didn't trust me, but in hindsight, their reluctance had deeper roots. Eventually, they relented, allowing me to bring 4 friends. I only had 3 close friends, so the group was set. My best friend Tim came with me the night before the others arrived to help me set things up. The lake house, though not enormous, was impressive, complete with a pool, hot tub, and a basement game room filled with pinball machines and a pool table. We arrived around 5, and my uncle had left the key in the mailbox a few days prior. Tim was awestruck by the house's splendor, but I was most excited to show him the basement. However, I noticed the door to the basement now had several new locks. It seemed strange, but given my uncle's expensive tastes, I didn't think much of it. Finding the keys was a hassle, but we eventually made our way downstairs. As I showed Tim around, he pointed out a strange door in the corner, partially obscured by a desk. Our curiosity piqued. We opened it to find several boxes, and 4 massive gun safes. Tim immediately questioned why my uncle, who had never mentioned hunting, would need so many gun safes. Despite my curiosity, I felt it was wrong to invade my uncle's privacy, so we locked the door and left. A few days later, Tim's mention of the room to our other friends sparked a flurry of speculation. They were insistent on exploring the contents of the mysterious room, despite my reservations. Their theories, from hidden treasures to dark secrets, wore me down. One friend was particularly anxious, convinced we might be in a killer's house. To ease their minds, I agreed to a quick look inside one box. What I found was far from ordinary: pipes, cigars, and a mountain of letters. As I sifted through them, I discovered several, addressed to me, my family, and my relatives. Each letter detailed how we would die, some in gruesome detail. The most chilling discovery was a series of threatening letters to my uncle, demanding money and detailing the dire consequences if payments weren't made. Photos of my oldest cousin, along with plans for her abduction, intensified the horror. I quickly put everything back, and my friends, equally shocked, tried to console me. The rest of the trip was tense. My friends' reassurances that the threats were old did little to calm my nerves. The realization that my family's safety hinged on my uncle's actions haunted me. When I returned home, I confided in my dad, hoping for support. His terse response, "Don't go through other people's things," ended the conversation, leaving me with unresolved fear. Years passed, and in 2013, my uncle died, reportedly by suicide. His death brought mixed emotions. While I mourned him, a significant weight lifted from my shoulders, freeing me from the constant dread of my family's lives being in his hands. I often wonder if his death was truly a suicide or something more sinister, but with his secrets buried, my family and I could finally breathe easier.
In the fall of 2019, I took a solo vacation to the remote wilderness of Yukon, Canada. Originally, my youngest brother was supposed to join me, but he had to cancel last minute due to work. Determined to make the best of it, I rented a secluded cabin through Airbnb. Despite its isolation, the cabin was accessible by paved roads and not too far from town. Upon arriving, I unloaded my truck and carried my bags into the living room. It was already dark, so I couldn't see much outside, but the inside was cozy and inviting. The long drive had exhausted me, so I left my bags unpacked and collapsed onto the couch. It must have been around 7:30 or 8 p.m. After a few minutes of relaxing, I heard a disturbing noise, someone yelling for help outside the cabin. Given the cabin's remote location, this was highly unexpected. I got up and peeked through the front window, spotting a man standing by my truck. He was holding a hunting rifle and looking directly at the cabin. The man didn't appear injured, and his claim for help seemed dubious. I didn't trust him enough to interact, especially given how isolated the area was. I pulled the curtain shut and pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. The sound of crunching leaves indicated the man was approaching the front porch. Once he reached the door, he stopped. I waited, holding my breath. After a minute, he called out, "Hey, I need some help. My friend needs a ride to the hospital." I considered responding but ultimately decided against it. He had a gun, and I had no means of defending myself if he was lying. The silence stretched on for another minute. "I saw you pull in," he yelled, banging on the door. His tone had turned aggressive, which only heightened my apprehension. His statement was also unsettling. Why had he been watching me? His footsteps receded from the porch and moved back towards my truck. I waited until I was sure he was gone before cautiously looking out the window. Seeing no sign of him, I went around and checked all the locks. Every door and window was secure except for one, a small half window in the kitchen with a missing latch. The screw holes and scratched paint suggested it had been removed recently. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I went outside to retrieve my tool kit from the truck. Ignoring the Airbnb rules against modifications, I drilled 2 long screws through the window frame, ensuring it couldn't be opened. I hoped the owners wouldn't notice or mind. After an hour of watching videos on my phone, I took my suitcase to the bedroom and got ready for bed. I lay there for over an hour, unable to sleep, when I heard a couple of thuds against the outer wall of the cabin, followed by a scraping sound. I sat up, staring at the bedroom door, straining to hear any further noises. Scenarios involving the man from earlier ran through my mind. Eventually, I must have dozed off because I woke up to daylight. The eerie sounds from the night before came rushing back. I cautiously walked through the house, everything seeming normal until I reached the kitchen. The small window with the missing latch had a gap at the bottom, as if someone had tried to pry it open. Outside, the frame bore scratches and dents. Curiously, no other windows showed signs of tampering. Whoever had attempted the break-in knew about the missing latch. I immediately contacted the Airbnb host, threw my belongings into the truck, and left the cabin. Whether it was the man asking for help or another person, someone had planned this. My cautiousness had likely saved my life. If I had opened the door or left the window unsecured, that remote cabin in Yukon could have been the last place I ever stayed.